The Lord is with you.
And also with you.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord.
After Jesus' birth, which happened in Bethlehem of Judea, during the reign of Herod, astrologers from the east arrived in Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the newborn ruler of the Jews? We observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." At this news, Herod became greatly disturbed, as did all of Jerusalem. Summoning all the chief priests and religious scholars of the people, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem of Judea," he informed them. "Here is what the prophet has written. And you, Bethlehem, land of Judea, are by no means least among the leaders of Judea, since from you will come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Herod called the astrologers aside and found out the exact time of the star's appearance. Then he sent them to Bethlehem after having instructed them, "Go and get detailed information about the child. When you have found him, report it to me so that I may go and offer homage as well." After their audience with the ruler, they set out. The star that they had observed at its rising went ahead of them until it came standstill over the place where the child lay. They were overjoyed at seeing the star, and upon entering the house, found the child with Mary, his mother. They prostrated themselves and paid homage. Then they opened their coffers and presented the child with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They were warned in a dream not to return to Herod, so they went back to their own country by another route. The Gospel of the Lord.
While also the old and mundane dealing of having this head, nose crud that everybody else has, so please bear with me as I cough and sputter this thing. I don't think this is probably unusual for kids who have grown up in a church setting, but I really wanted a miracle when I was a kid. I wanted something big to happen. And, part of it was I wanted proof that God existed, but I also really wanted proof that God was here and he was taking care of us too. One Christmas Eve when I was a kid and Santa and God were still kind of confused together for me, we were looking at Christmas lights around town, and a stray dog ran past our car and out into the darkness. When I got home, I wrote to Santa / prayed to God that he could keep all of my presents that year. I didn't need those presents. I just wanted to know that stray dog had found its home and that it was okay. And I just asked that Santa give me one thing that night, that when I woke up in the morning, there'd be a little tiny stuffed puppy as proof that puppy was also saved. As you can imagine, there was no stuffed puppy at my bed the next morning, and no surety of where that other dog went as well. Later as a teen, when Santa and God were a little less confused in my mind, I still prayed that I would see God. I would close my eyes really, really tight and try to focus really, really hard. And when you do that, you kind of start to see like the colors in your eyes and the lights in your eyes, and you press down really hard. And I tried to make that become some vision of God. And it never happened. God didn't show up that way for me. But when I was 18, something miraculous did happen. And I know I've shared this with some of you before. I had accidentally found myself in conversation with a homeless man outside of an Ace Hardware store. He was a quite unintimidating guy, no harm, really just a nice guy that was just homeless and outside. And I started to have a conversation with him, and I was very afraid and very intimidated. But he stuck his hand out and shook my hand and introduced himself to me. And in that moment, I knew in some unexplainable way that God did exist. That God loved this man, that God loved me, and that God was with us on that little piece of sidewalk in that nondescript hardware store. On Christmas Day, we celebrated God showing up in the world. We celebrated this beautiful, intimate moment between Mary and Joseph and the birth of their child. Today, we celebrate our invitation to see that. We celebrate not the fact that God showed up, but that we are now invited to see God. Today, we celebrate sight. Today, we are invited to be like those three magi who felt something, who watched a star, who sought out guidance from others, and found their way to a tiny child. And there, in hands and feet and eyes and skin and warm breath, found the presence of God. Very few of us will have mystical visions of God in our lives, and probably even less of us will receive stuffed animals as signs of God's existence on our beds. But what we have received, what we all have received, are these bodies, these hands and feet and skin and warm breath. And I think one message we might take from our gospel today is that maybe we can stop waiting for visions, stop waiting for proof, and know instead that the proof is walking amongst us. God has chosen to let God's self be seen in our very being and in all the stuff this world and the cosmos surrounds us in. Today we celebrate that God has given us sight to see God's presence. But the challenge with this celebration is what we will choose to do with that sight. Whose vision in the gospel will we decide to take on? Will we be like the Magi? Will we see the stars align and cause us to believe that something miraculous has happened and go to pay homage to that miraculous event? Or will we be like Herod and the chief priests, who also believed something miraculous did happen? They gave a lot of credence to the Magi, but instead attempted to trick the Magi into revealing the location so that they could stop this miracle. And we know that with that, Herod's fear enraged to such a point that he chose to have every child under the age of 2 killed because of that fear that he had on that day. With new sight, the Magi came to bless the presence of God in the world. And with new sight, Herod sought to curse this presence and the possibility that it might bring into the world. It's hard, I think, to identify at first with Herod. This man that would go to such drastic lengths to stop this from happening. It seems too outlandish for any of us to identify with, but we have to remember that Herod was just a person like us. A person of hands and feet and skin and warm breath, just like that baby in the manger. What happened to him, though? What happened to his sight? The birth of Jesus attacked Herod's very being. Herod was rightly the king at that time. That power was his power to have. His very identity, his whole being was wrapped up in being king. And suddenly he was at risk of losing that identity and losing his very self. So much of our lives, we spend our time building up who we are, our identity, our being in this world. We claim our characteristics as being the funny one, or the smart one, or the serious one, or the adventurous one. We claim what we are good at, and oftentimes become that. We become mothers and writers and salesmen and businesswomen and artists. As little toddlers, as children, as young adults and adults, we create who we are and how the world sees us and how we operate in the world. And sometimes when that identity becomes so strong, it limits our vision. We only can see ourselves and how we are supposed to be in the world. And in that, fear plays a huge part as we try to protect that identity. As horrific as Herod might seem to us, I don't believe his fear and his motives are too far off from things that we ourselves feel as well. So what do we do then? How do we instead see like the Magi? How do we celebrate sight? How do we bless the coming of newness and change in our lives like the Magi instead of cursing it like Herod. I think we are able to do that when we realize that we too are our own epiphanies. When we realize that we too manifest the glory of God. Jesus' story is our story. Like all epiphanies, it's some simple reality that manifests something truly unbelievable. A tiny child born into the world with the glory of God within it. That's us too. Our first reading offers us these words. Upon you the Lord shines. Nations shall walk by your light. Raise your eyes and look about. You shall be radiant at what you see. Your heart shall throb and overflow. Raise your eyes. Look about. You shall be radiant at what you see. We are the Magi when we know who we are. Beautiful children of God, made of hands and feet and skin and warm breath, and all of that made to manifest the glory of God. And when we know that, our light shines in the darkness, just as the prophet Isaiah said. And we celebrate the sight of God on sidewalks, in front of hardware stores, in decisions at conference tables, in kind words between friends, and in the hands that we join tonight in prayer. God's presence is made real in the simplest of moments and everyday decisions. Tonight, during this Epiphany, we celebrate sight. Tonight, we see God and we see ourselves for who we are without fear, without the need to protect or assert ourselves. Our simple hands and our feet and our skin and our breath are the presence of God in the world. Some 2,000 years ago, the Magi saw this happening. They knelt down and offered all they could to the manifestation of God in the world. And tonight we are asked to do the same, all around us, in this church, in our homes, at our workplaces, around the world, and in our very beings. God is here. God has chosen to be realized in the stuff of the world. Let us see and let us celebrate. God is here.